Okay, so if you're anything like me, you may have glossed over sort of diminished chords, diminished harmony, this kind of concept. So this video is my way of trying to internalize some of this stuff for myself, and I'm also hoping that this helps one or two people who might be watching this as well. We kind of have four main types of triads that we talk about in music theory. So you've got a major triad, that's a major triad, a minor triad, you could get an augmented triad, or a diminished triad. What I want to talk about is that diminished idea, really, today. So when we talk about kind of seventh chords, you end up finding these things called diminished seventh chords. And the things that I typically understand these to be, and things that I've used generally, would be these kind of shapes. Or you could do like an arpeggio and this sort of thing. You know, kind of a Ingve-ish thing, you know. All of it to me sounds a little bit cliched, and I think because I was relying on those a little bit, it stopped me from necessarily really understanding what was going on with this diminished harmony stuff. And so I wanted to do a few videos on this actually, but this is the first one kind of looking at the basics. So the diminished 7 chord is made up of 4 notes, and they are stacked a minor third away. So for instance, we're going to start with like an E diminished chord. So there on the 7th fret, we've got an E in there, we've got a B flat in there, we've got a D flat in there, and in the top we've got a G. And so you could play that like this as well: E, G, B flat, D flat, and then E again. That's the sound of the Police, a diminished chord. Anyway, so you also notice that you can move those around in minor thirds and you get the same notes again. So you get like a D flat here, you get a G here, a B flat, and then the top an E. Move it up, you get a G, you get a D flat, an E, and then in the top a B flat. And there'd be one other, wouldn't there, starting with a B flat. So it's got this nice kind of symmetrical quality to it. So things that might be worth starting off trying to do initially would be to join these up. And shapes. So I spent some time doing this today. And you get this one, which is a little bit trickier. So maybe learn the cliche first, so you can move around. I'll put this tab for this up on my Patreon if you're interested in these diminished chords. It's worth knowing, and that's probably one of the first things you get taught about this, is that you can stack these minor thirds, and then because of the shape of the things, you can move them around in minor thirds, and they're just inversions of one another. And so there's those kind of 3 key shapes that I think are worth knowing. So there's like an E diminished on the A string, an E diminished on the E string, and an E diminished on the D string would look like this. So familiarise yourself with those first of all. Now, the other thing is to say that normally a diminished chord is a moment where we're moving to somewhere else. It normally resolves somewhere, and typically what you might find is that something will resolve up a semitone. So in that case I'm going from an E diminished to an F minor, or you could go from an E diminished to an F major. But the key here is that we're talking about a sort of cadence, and in this case what I want you to think about is that if you had one extra note, this could be a different type of chord. And normally that one note that we need to add will be a fifth away from where we end up. So for instance, so we go from an E diminished to an F minor. So this E diminished to an F minor, what's a fifth away from F minor or F would be a C, right? So the dominant of F minor would be C. So you could think about E diminished in this case as being a variation of a C dominant. To an F minor. So we end up then, so we take that E diminished, and we can stick a C in the bass. And that's a very recognisable sound. So I think the key to kind of using this diminished stuff and understanding how to play with it is to figure out where it's moving towards, and then you can really start to be a bit more creative with it than just hitting the cliches. So for instance, at the start of Stella by Starlight, we get this kind of diminished chord. And typically after it you might follow it with an A dominant. So I'm thinking of that as being an E diminished here until I find where it's going to kind of settle, and that might be in that case an A 7 flat 9. So in that case, you know, I might write on the sheet, and you could do this with kind of any diminished chord you find. Try and figure out where it's moving towards and what that extra note would be that you need to add to it to make it work as a dominant 7 flat 9. And in that way, I think you could, instead of just seeing it as an E diminished and an opportunity for, you see it as an E diminished with an opportunity for playing a C triad over it, or even a C 7 flat 9, as well as kind of this diminished cliche stuff. And make it a little bit more musical. The other thing that I wanted to do was show you some chords which add in this extra note. So we're starting with this E diminished, and in this case we said that we're sort of viewing this as a C 7 flat 9, so C dominant 7 flat 9, so we need to find a way to add in a C. So we've got this cliched voicing here, and what I thought was we could change it to this, so you end up with an E, a C, a D flat, and then a G, and a B flat in the top. So that's one kind of voicing that you could replace that E diminished with, and I think it's a little bit more surprising. And again, you could do the same thing up here. So again, we move up a minor third, so then we've got a G diminished, you know, or an E diminished in an inversion. And in the same way here, we want to add in a C somewhere, so I'm going to take the D flat and move that down to a C. Put the D flat in the top. Another interesting voicing. Or you could put it in the bottom here. Or you could play down here. So these are just some voicings that I found today that I thought, well, those sound that come from these diminished chords, but I'm using that knowledge that basically it's one note away from being a dominant 7 flat 9, and I'm adding that in some way to make those voicings kind of more interesting to me. So this kind of voicing, you can add notes underneath as well. And again, you can move these around. So that's just some playing around with the diminished chord that I've been doing today. I think makes it sound a little bit more interesting to my ear, and it means that I can avoid just looking at a sheet and seeing diminished and thinking, okay, play these cliches, and you know. But I can actually look at it and make sense of it musically, and actually interpret it in a way where I understand it, instead of I'm just surprised by it and thinking, oh dear, what do I play with this? So I've also just put together this little phrase where we'd be thinking about resolving from a C to an F minor, and can do this thing which to me sounds quite fresh and not just a super obvious, because we're adding some other kind of spicy notes from the F minor scale here. So we start on this D flat, so we're just outlining some notes of that G diminished or E diminished. So that's the basic shape, is we're going to be doing that, but we're going to take some of the notes that are diatonic to F minor. So we've got a D flat in the top, so you get that full diminished shape there, and then jump down to this E diminished shape, and then jump down to this C sharp diminished shape. So again, I'm visualizing a G diminished shape, then an E diminished shape, and then C sharp or D flat diminished shape. So hopefully that's sort of an introduction to this diminished stuff. So I'll put together a little kind of exercise sheet for this stuff that I've been working on today on Patreon, but hopefully that's useful to 1 or 2 people. And we're going to follow up some of this stuff with some more stuff on diminished chords. Thank you for stopping by. Feel free to like and subscribe. Cheers.